For years, the world saw only the adorable face of a young prince, smiling, waving, delighting crowds with the effortless charm that seemed to come naturally to him. Cameras adored him, the public embraced him, and from a distance, everything appeared exactly as it should be. But behind the towering gates of the palace, beyond the polished corridors and carefully curated appearances, something far more unsettling was unfolding. There was a silence that didn't belong, a tension that couldn't be photographed. Servants spoke in hushed tones. Staff rotated more frequently than anyone cared to explain. Nannies arrived, stayed briefly, and then disappeared, some in the middle of the night, leaving behind no explanations, only whispers. At first glance, Prince Louis was the embodiment of youthful charm, waving from balconies, grinning at cameras, tugging playfully at his mother's dress. But even as the public swooned over his antics, something darker brewed within the palace walls. Courtiers whispered about unexplained outbursts. Staff who worked closely with Louis began resigning quietly, citing personal reasons, though behind closed doors. Their expressions told a different story: haunted, unsettled, afraid to speak. One former royal nanny, who refused to be named, described nights where Louis would cry for hours without pause. No comfort could soothe him. "He wasn't throwing tantrums," she said, her voice shaking. It was like he was lost in his own mind. Her words were dismissed at the time, buried beneath layers of protocol and denial. But she wasn't the only one. Insiders began pointing out that Louis was often mysteriously absent from key royal appearances. Unlike George or Charlotte, whose presence at events was strategically planned and polished, Louis's participation was erratic. He'd arrive late or not at all. When he did appear, handlers were unusually close, constantly whispering, distracting, redirecting. What exactly were they hiding? Footage from recent events, especially the Jubilee, has become a point of obsession for behavioral experts. They've begun analyzing every blink, every subtle flinch. One striking detail: Louis' complete emotional withdrawal during loud applause followed by sudden jarring laughter that seemed rehearsed. "This isn't typical child behavior," one expert stated. "It suggests emotional overstimulation or masking, possibly both." Even more disturbing was the silence from the media. Reports of Louis' behavior were cut from televised broadcasts. Paparazzi photos, normally ruthless in pursuit of royal children, were mysteriously withheld from circulation. Several journalists now confirm they received strong advice from palace liaison to refrain from publishing anything that could misrepresent Louis' emotional state. A gag order veiled in public relations language. Behind the scenes, the royal family reportedly turned to an outside expert, someone who could operate without press scrutiny. Enter Dr. K, a psychologist renowned for handling high-profile child cases in ultra-private environments. Her involvement was never meant to be public. She was discreetly brought in under the guise of an educational consultant. But her real mission was far more critical. Dr. K spent weeks shadowing Louis, observing not just his public behavior, but his private world, his patterns, his fears, his interactions with family. According to insiders, what she found left her shaken, not because Louis was unwell, but because he was clearly unprotected by a system that valued image over intervention. The palace hoped her presence would resolve matters quietly. But Dr. K wasn't here to maintain illusions. She was here to tell the truth. But the diagnosis was only the beginning. What followed inside the royal household was far more chilling than anyone imagined. Every smile masked a deeper story. Every wave was rehearsed. And the truth, it was hiding in plain sight. From fidgeting hands to blank stares, body language experts now believe the signs were always there. So why didn't the palace act sooner? Or did they already know? From the moment Prince Louis stepped into the public eye, his presence was carefully crafted. At Wimbledon, while George and Charlotte clapped politely and followed cues, Louis was often seen squirming, covering his ears, or staring off into space. During the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, the youngest royal was seen sticking out his tongue, wildly gesturing, or turning his back on the crowd mid-performance. The public brushed it off as childhood mischief. But behind the laughter, something was clearly unraveling. Observers now argue these weren't signs of misbehavior, but silent cries for help. Unlike his siblings, Louis seemed to drift in and out of the moment. At the balcony appearances, where George stood upright and Charlotte curtsied with grace, Louis was often either hyper-animated or eerily still. The contrast was striking. George appeared focused, Charlotte poised, but Louis, he was disconnected, distant, lost in a world few seemed to understand. Palace insiders later confessed there had been ongoing concerns about Louis' reactions to loud noises, unpredictable crowds, and sudden flashes of light. While the public saw quirky expressions, aides privately described him as overwhelmed, sometimes freezing completely during rehearsals. Reports surfaced of meltdowns prior to events and that Louis would only agree to attend if specific comfort routines were followed. These moments were never meant to reach the outside world, but they almost did. On more than one occasion, hot mic recordings captured unsettling backstage chatter between royal aides. During one engagement, a tech overheard a handler say, "Just keep him smiling. If he stares again, take him off the stage." Another muttered, "We can't keep doing this. It's not fair to him." These remarks never aired. The feeds were cut. The footage disappeared. But the tension, it was mounting. By now, even members of the palace press team were becoming uneasy. A quiet rebellion was forming between those sworn to protect the monarchy's image and those desperate to protect the boy. Journalists began pressing harder. One was reportedly told, "This is not your concern. He's fine." But deep down, even they knew Louis wasn't fine. And the act was wearing thin. Medical aides, too, were growing frustrated. They argued for more accommodations, fewer public appearances, longer breaks between events. But their voices were drowned out by an institution determined to present strength and continuity at all costs. As one aide put it, "The firm doesn't know how to deal with vulnerability, especially not when it wears a crown." Experts believe the royal handlers tried to manage Louis in real time, using subtle distraction techniques during public appearances, tapping his shoulder, whispering in his ear, guiding his hands into a wave. These weren't gentle nudges. They were performances tailored to mask a growing crisis. Still, the palace remained silent. The world watched, unaware, and Louis, trapped in a golden cage, continued to perform. And just when the world thought the palace would intervene quietly, one voice shattered the protocol. She was the palace's last hope. But now she's its most dangerous whistleblower. In a shocking turn, Dr. K, the psychologist hired to protect the monarchy's youngest prince, did the unthinkable. She went public. Her words weren't just clinical, they were heartbreaking, and they exposed a system built on secrecy, denial, and emotional neglect. Dr. K was no ordinary consultant. For over 2 decades, she had handled some of the most complex cases of childhood trauma in high-profile families around the world. Her reputation for discretion, accuracy, and fearless advocacy made her the obvious choice when whispers about Prince Louis could no longer be ignored. With royal-level security clearance and a strict confidentiality agreement, she entered the palace not as a critic, but as a lifeline. Her sessions with Louis were intended to be brief routine assessments, just enough to soothe internal anxieties. But what began as standard observation quickly spiraled into something darker. According to leaked sources close to the psychologist, Louis didn't speak like a carefree child. He spoke like someone drowning quietly. In one session, he allegedly asked, "Why do I have to smile when I'm scared?" A question that left Dr. K shaken to her core. He described feeling trapped inside loud rooms, confused about why he had to be in front of cameras, unsure of what was real and what was performance. He reportedly expressed a sense of invisibility, saying, "They only see me when I'm happy." These weren't tantrums. These were early signs of a child in emotional distress. But rather than rallying around him, the institution pressed for normally. Dr. K, concerned by the urgency of what she was witnessing, pleaded with senior palace officials to reduce Louis' public exposure. She insisted that the boy needed professional therapeutic support, not rehearsals, not briefings, not more photo ops. But each time she raised the alarm, she was met with deflection. She was told the family couldn't afford speculation and that the public must see a unified, happy front. Weeks passed. The sessions grew heavier. Louis' demeanor, once energetic and sporadic, shifted into periods of silence and visible withdrawal. He stopped making eye contact. He reportedly whispered during one session, "I want to go somewhere quiet, but there's always a camera." That was when Dr. K made the decision. She couldn't be complicit anymore. Her resignation was swift and silent, or so the palace thought. Within hours, a copy of her final internal report was leaked, not to tabloids, not to rival royals, but to a global child mental health network who immediately flagged it as a call for institutional accountability. The document outlined a pattern of emotional mismanagement, systemic negligence, and a disturbing prioritization of image over the well-being of a child. Dr. K's leak wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of protection. But it shattered the palace's carefully controlled illusion. For the first time in decades, a royal scandal wasn't about affairs or finances. It was about something far more damning, the inner suffering of a child silenced by duty. But what exactly did that report say? And why is the palace in full lockdown mode? Now, the words in the report were clinical, but the weight they carried was devastating. Prince Louis, the cheeky royal the media adored, was battling a condition that could change everything. Not just for him, but for the entire line of succession. Buried deep within Dr. K's leaked report was the revelation that stunned even seasoned experts, a rare neurological emotional disorder unnamed for privacy but severe in implication. According to the report, Louis exhibited persistent patterns of social detachment, heightened sensitivity to stimuli, and overwhelming emotional responses that appeared without warning. In simpler terms, he was struggling to process the world around him, and the royal world was the most demanding stage of all. The condition, while not classified as a disability, was described as developmentally unique. Louis was intellectually sharp and expressive in controlled settings, but placed under stress, especially the performative pressure of royal life, his responses became unpredictable. He could remain calm in one moment, then break down in the next. A simple cheer from a crowd or the flicker of a camera flash could trigger a silent shutdown or an emotional overload. The report was unequivocal. The prince was high-functioning but operating under immense psychological strain every time he was thrust into the public eye. Dr. K did not make her assessment lightly. She outlined her process in detail, noting that while Louis possessed extraordinary resilience, his neurological profile required long-term emotional support and structured environments. The very structure of royal life, its rehearsals, appearances, expectations, was in direct conflict with what he needed to feel safe. Public performance, the report stated, acts as an accelerant, rapidly intensifying his symptoms. Perhaps most damning of all was a single sentence buried on page 14, a sentence now echoing through royal halls like a prophecy. Unrest. This could evolve into an identity crisis with constitutional implications. It wasn't just a warning. It was a red flag waved at a centuries-old institution obsessed with lineage, composure, and the illusion of perfection. Because this wasn't merely about a child struggling in silence. It was about the potential unraveling of a future king's role. The line of succession is built not just on blood, but on the perception of strength and stability. What happens when the youngest heir, once charmingly unpredictable, is revealed to be quietly falling apart? How does a monarchy adapt when one of its own no longer fits the mold but cannot be allowed to break free? There was an opportunity here, a chance for empathy, for transparency, for the monarchy to step forward and lead with honesty. But that's not the path they chose. And yet, instead of compassion, the palace chose control, launching a response more chilling than the diagnosis itself. The diagnosis may have been private, but the palace's reaction was anything but. Leaked emails, media blackouts, and carefully staged photos suggest a calculated effort to rewrite Prince Louis's reality. As Dr. K's reports spread behind closed doors, the royals were already rewriting the narrative with ruthless precision. Within hours of the report's leak, Kensington Palace moved into overdrive. The strategy was clear. Drown the truth in curated smiles. Suddenly, Lizzie was everywhere, grinning in the gardens with his siblings, laughing in casual candid shots, holding hands with Catherine during family strolls. But these weren't spontaneous moments. Every photo, every frame was staged. Multiple sources now confirm entire scenes were coordinated with press photographers under non-disclosure agreements. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was crisis choreography. Behind the curtain, tabloid insiders began whispering about a blackout deal. Major publications reportedly received calls from palace representatives asking them to temper their reporting. Editors were allegedly promised early access to royal scoops in exchange for silence on Louis's condition. Within days, the internet was flooded not with concern but with fluff. Prince Lou's funniest faces. The royal rascal strikes again. Headlines designed to disarm, distract, disappear the truth. But not everyone inside the machine stayed silent. Former aides began to speak off record but firm. One described being instructed to create moments to orchestrate playful distractions whenever Louis appeared uncomfortable during events. Another revealed how press access was revoked for any outlet that dared question why Lizzie had been missing from multiple tours. What was once a media darling had become a tightly controlled symbol, a narrative asset. And yet, in the shadows of this manipulation, the cracks widened. Internal documents hinted at something darker. Louis was being pulled from several future royal appearances, not for his well-being, but to avoid optical inconsistencies. Rather than confront the emotional toll, the palace simply chose to hide him, a strategy of absence. A child edited from the frame. Tension flared between Prince William and the palace advisors tasked with image control. Sources say he pushed for transparency for prioritizing Louis' mental health over public perception. But he was met with resistance. The monarchy couldn't afford the perception of weakness, especially not now. Not when so much of the future was built on the illusion of unity. A war was brewing behind the walls of Kensington. A silent war between those who wanted to protect a son and those desperate to protect a crown. And in the midst of that chaos, as image makers polished the palace windows for the cameras, one voice would soon pierce through it all. But while the adults strategized damage control, one figure broke rank with a message that would rip open the royal fade. No press statement, no televised interview, just a handwritten letter quietly delivered, never meant to be seen. But now, Catherine's words to a close confidant have leaked, and they reveal a mother at war, not just with the world, but with her own palace. The letter was never intended for public consumption. It was entrusted to an old friend from Catherine's university days, someone outside the walls of privilege. But as the pressure around Lizzie mounted and silence from the palace turned into strategic denial, the letter found its way into the hands of the press. What it exposed wasn't just heartbreak. It was rebellion. In her own handwriting, Catherine laid bare a truth the world suspected but could never prove. She had been fighting for her son in isolation. She wrote of her guilt, how she sensed something was wrong but felt paralyzed by royal expectations. She recounted moments where Louis clung to her, overwhelmed and shaking before being ushered into the spotlight. And in those words was a mother haunted by the thought that she hadn't done enough to shield him. Her tone shifted from sorrow to fury. She described royal meetings where her concerns were brushed off, where she was told Louis would grow out of it or just needed more structure. She wrote that behind closed doors, compassion was considered weakness and emotion was an inconvenience. Her letter revealed nights spent crying beside Louis' bed, whispering promises she feared she couldn't keep. I told him it's okay to feel scared, she wrote, but I'm not sure he believed me. One of the most startling confessions came midway through the letter. Catherine admitted that at one point she had seriously considered leaving royal life altogether. Not because of the press, not because of scandal, but because she felt she couldn't be both a princess and a mother, not in a world that demanded perfection from a child who was struggling just to breathe through the pressure. She also disclosed growing friction with William. While he stood by her in private, she suggested that he was caught in a chokehold between his duty to the crown and his role as a father. Their arguments, she wrote, weren't about love, but about priorities. He wants to protect Louis, she penned, but he's terrified of what it might cost the monarchy. But it was the final line of her letter that struck like a dagger through the palace's polished image. He's not a symbol. He's my son. It was a declaration, a warning, and a quiet refusal to let Louis be sacrificed for the sake of tradition. The leak of this letter couldn't be contained. It resonated far beyond tabloids. It echoed in mothers' hearts across the globe. The public began to question not just the palace's silence, but its very values. What is the cost of monarchy when it demands silence from those in pain? But just as Catherine began pushing for change, another royal stepped forward with a very different motive. As Catherine wept, Camilla calculated. Sources close to the Queen Consort claimed she saw Louis' diagnosis not as a crisis, but as an opportunity. An opportunity to reshape the monarchy's line of succession and secure power where it mattered most. The leak of Dr. K's report sent shock waves through the palace. But behind the panic, there was one figure who didn't flinch. Camilla, seasoned in scandal and skilled in survival, reportedly began holding private conversations within hours of the report reaching senior royals. Her message, though unspoken publicly, was unmistakable. If Louis was now a risk to the firm's stability, then decisions needed to be made ruthless ones. Behind closed doors, Camilla is said to have raised unsettling questions with Charles. Questions no one else dared to utter aloud. Was Louis fit to serve? Was it time to rethink the line of succession? In her view, the crown could not afford emotional volatility. Not when the world was watching the next generation so closely. She proposed a controversial pivot, one that would place Princess Charlotte, often praised for her composure and presence, in a more prominent future role. The suggestion wasn't idle. It was strategic. According to insiders, Camilla orchestrated a secret meeting with senior advisors. The purpose to quietly explore a long-term plan for transitioning Louis out of visible royal duties. What one source chillingly described as a soft removal. No public announcements, no disgrace, just a quiet reorientation of focus, fewer appearances, diminishing relevance, an elegant eraser masked as protection. But not everyone was willing to play along. When word of the meeting reached William, he was livid. A source close to the royal household described the confrontation between William and Camilla as the most volatile moment in years. He reportedly accused her of exploiting his son's pain for political gain, of undermining the family under the guise of duty. The walls may not have ears, but the staff certainly did, and they haven't stopped talking since. What makes this all the more insidious is Camilla's long-held reputation as a behind-the-scenes operator. Never overt, always precise. Some believe this isn't about Charlotte at all, but about consolidating influence while Charles remains on the throne. By reducing Louis's role, Camilla not only limits unpredictability, but subtly reshapes the future of the monarchy into an image she can control. Her vision is clear. A monarchy streamlined, polished, and void of complication. And if that means sidelining a child who is struggling, then so be it. Sympathy, after all, has never been the strategy of survival in royal circles. But this time, her machinations may have gone too far. Because the story of Prince Louis is no longer just whispers behind palace doors. It's a storm, and its winds are howling through every corner of the monarchy. With the family tearing apart, the Queen's shadow loomed over it, all her secret wishes for Louis, only now coming to light. Long before her passing, Queen Elizabeth left behind a series of confidential memos. Among them was a single-page handwritten, sealed, and addressed to Louis. The contents were unknown until now. What the Queen foresaw would leave even her closest advisors in stunned silence. The discovery came not through ceremony, but through chaos. As legal teams combed through the late Queen's estate, cataloging documents and private correspondences, one envelope stood out. It bore no official seal, no crest, just the faint script of a grandmother. It wasn't meant for Parliament. It wasn't even meant for Charles. It was meant for Louis. Those who read the letter describe it as startling, not for what it revealed about the present, but for how accurately it predicted the storm that now surrounded her great-grandson. In her unmistakable tone measured, loving yet firm, Elizabeth expressed her growing concern for the weight of royal duty on future generations. She spoke of a world that was changing too fast, of expectations that no longer fit the souls they were thrust upon. And she named Louis, not George, not Charlotte, as the one who might bear that conflict most deeply. She wrote of watching him as a toddler, observant, quiet, hesitant in crowds, and fearing that the traditions which once shaped her reign might someday crush his spirit. In her own words, "Some are born to rule. Others are born to remind the crown of its humanity." That one line tucked near the bottom of the page now echoes like prophecy. But the Queen didn't stop at sentiment. She made a request, one that shook the foundation of protocol. She suggested the creation of a new support framework for non-heir royals, one that would allow individuals like Lucy to step back without scandal, to live outside the glare without disgrace. It was a revolutionary idea, hidden beneath the warmth of grandmotherly prose, and it was buried almost immediately. Charles, upon reading the memo, allegedly deemed it too destabilizing to implement. According to insiders, he ordered the page sealed, filed, and never discussed again. To acknowledge it would mean acknowledging that not all royals were fit for the role. And in his eyes, the monarchy could never afford that truth, not publicly. But somehow the letter resurfaced, and when it reached Catherine's hands, everything changed. She read it alone, clutched it close, and made no effort to hide what it meant to her. To Catherine, this wasn't just a wish. It was a mandate, proof that she wasn't imagining Louis' struggle, that the Queen herself had seen it coming, that the most enduring monarch of the modern era had in her final days chosen empathy over legacy. The memo now lives in a locked drawer in Kensington, but its words have begun to shape decisions behind the scenes. Because if the Queen's final wish was to spare Louis from the burdens of duty, how long can the palace continue to pretend it knows better? But as tensions rise and secrets spill, the future of the monarchy may now rest on a child's shoulders. And the decision no one wants to face. What happens to a prince who can't live like a prince? When titles crush more than they crown, and expectations become shackles instead of legacies. As the palace clings to illusion, a reckoning is fast approaching. Prince Louis stands at the center of a storm he never chose. But what comes next may change the monarchy forever. Inside royal chambers, quiet conversations have already begun. No press briefings, no official policies, just whispers, strategic, anxious whispers of a potential reworking of duties for the younger royals. For decades, the system has remained rigid. Heirs and spares, public and private, duty and sacrifice. But Louis is forcing a new question into the monarchy's core. What if the crown doesn't fit? Sources suggest a small group of senior aides along with Catherine herself are advocating for a formal structure that would allow Louis to step away from public responsibilities before they consume him. No scandal, no exile, just space, protection. A future designed not by protocol, but by love. Catherine, emboldened by the Queen's hidden memo, now stands as the driving force behind this quiet revolution. She's not asking for sympathy. She's demanding a new model. But as always in royal life, love is complicated by legacy. William, once seen as the bridge between old and new, now finds himself trapped in the middle. On one hand, he's a father, a man who hears his son's silence louder than any royal fanfare. On the other, he's the future king, sworn to uphold the very institution that's tearing his family apart. Those close to him say the strain is visible. Sleepless nights, canceled meetings, emotional distance, he's breaking, and the palace knows it. And then came the words, the ones no one expected. Reportedly spoken during a confidential therapy session, later shared anonymously but undeniably from someone inside the inner circle. Louis is said to have whispered, "If I disappear, will anyone still clap?" Not a tantrum, not a child's game, a plea, a heartbreaking glimpse into the mind of a boy who has already begun to equate love with performance, presence with purpose, applause with worth. The leak of that sentence did something the palace couldn't have anticipated. It cracked the public narrative wide open. Overnight, sympathy surged. Social media turned from mockery to mourning. Hashtags demanding Louis be set free trended for days. Journalists who once played along with the image now asked harder questions. And parents around the world began to see their own children in the boy behind the title. The monarchy, for all its tradition, now faces a choice it has never had to confront: so publicly maintain the myth or embrace the humanity, because if Prince Louis walks away from royal life, it won't be out of rebellion, it will be out of survival, and that more than any scandal or abdication may be the most revolutionary act of all. Insiders warned the palace is still divided. Some believe Louis' departure would set a dangerous precedent. Others argue it could be the very reset the institution needs. But beneath every opinion is the undeniable truth. Louis was never meant to be a symbol. He was born into a machine he never asked to fuel. And now, for the first time, the machine is being forced to look inward. 1 minute changed everything. And now the world watches, heartbroken, breathless, waiting to see what the palace does next. What happens next will not just shape his future. It may very well shape the future of the institution itself. And for the first time in a long time, the world isn't just watching. It's listening.